For Nazi Germany, 1936 is the year of Olympic Games. The regime wants to present Germany to the international community as a peace-loving nation. Amateur filmmaker Ludwig Geim documents the opening of the 4th Winter Olympics by Hitler on the 6th of February in Garmisch-Partenkirchen. Athletes from 28 nations are present in the stadium. Wilhelm Bogner takes the Olympic oath. More than 600 athletes compete in 17 events for Olympic medals over 10 days. Erik Larsson from Sweden wins the 18-kilometer cross-country race. The ice hockey teams from Canada and Hungary face each other in the second round of the tournament. Figure skaters Maxi Herber and Ernst Bayer are the favorites of both the audience and the dictator. They win the gold medal for Germany in pair skating. The glitter of international sports makes the Nazi dictatorship acceptable to the world. A staff trip of a Berlin-based company to Eisenach. The first item on the agenda is culture, a visit to the Wartburg, where Martin Luther once translated the Bible into German. Then, a cozy get-together organized by the German Labour Front. These scenes are typical of the feel-good dictatorship during the mid-1930s. In the Third Reich, the individual must subordinate himself to the community unconditionally. By now, people need the permission of the authorities before they choose a profession or change jobs, and their loyalty is rewarded with tax relief and social warmth. Under the terms of the Treaty of Versailles, the Rhineland is a demilitarized zone. For some time, Hitler has been considering dispatching troops so as to create a fait accompli. Finally, on the 7th of March 1936, he orders the Wehrmacht to cross into the Rhineland. Koblenz and Cologne are occupied while the propaganda cameras roll.
Hitler always later referred to this as an enormous risk that he took then when the German troops entered the demilitarized zone on the 7th of March 1936. In reality, the risk was less great than that because German intelligence in Paris had already reported back that the French would not move unless the British moved, and it was certain that the British would not do anything other than enter verbal protests of what had gone on. It was certain they would not move militarily. So Hitler knew that the French were extremely unlikely to move. He sent, I think, only 3,000 troops into the Rhineland. If the French had have moved against this, of course, the result would probably have been that the German troops would have been forced to retreat pretty rapidly. It would have been a big loss of face for Hitler, and who knows what the consequences of that might have been.
France's lack of reaction boosts Hitler's self-assurance. From now on, he believes himself to be infallible. Other restrictions of the Versailles Treaty, hindering Germany's rearmament, have long been disregarded. The national armament industry has had adequate capacities at its disposal. This rare footage shows Joseph Goebbels visiting the Krupp plant in Essen. The speech by Krupp manager Gustav von Bohlen und Halbach demonstrates how unconditionally Germany's industrialists blend into the system of the Führer state.
Wenn wir die Arbeit ehren, so handeln wir auch im Sinne des Mannes, der an der Spitze des neuen Deutschlands steht, der uns allen ein leuchtendes Vorbild vaterländischer Hingabe ist. So fordere ich Sie, den Werkkameraden, auf, mit mir einzustimmen in den Ruf. Unser geliebter Führer und Reichskanzler Adolf Hitler, Sieg! Sieg!
The so-called Führer election is to demonstrate how compliantly the Germans have come to support Hitler's regime. The propaganda machinery pulls out all the stops. A campaign film suggests that Hitler is above all party interests and that all recent great successes are due to him. According to the official election results, 99.8% vote for the Führer. The dictator is committed by the people to follow the policy he himself had wanted, an informer reports to the outside world. Meanwhile, the top Nazi rabble-rouser Julius Streicher travels tirelessly across the land, delivering his anti-Semitic rantings with the aim to incite the German people against the Jews.
Wenn das deutsche Volk die Judenherrschaft in seinem Lande brach, so befreit es sich damit aus der wirtschaftlichen, geistigen und politischen Versklavung durch eine bluts- und damit wesensfremde Rasse. Die Judenfrage ist aber nicht nur eine Frage des deutschen Volkes. Der Ablauf des Geschehens in der Welt sagt jedem, der sich der Wahrheit nicht verschließen will, dass die Judenfrage schon seit langem zur Frage der ganzen Menschheit geworden ist. Der Völkerfriede wird erst dann in die Welt gekommen sein, wenn dem Nutznießer der Kriege die Möglichkeit für immer genommen ist, die Völker gegeneinander zu hetzen. Wer sehend geworden ist, der weiß, ohne Lösung der Judenfrage keine Erlösung der Menschheit.
Many Jewish families leave Germany and move to neighboring countries such as France or Holland, hoping to return home one day when Hitler's dictatorship is a thing of the past, and Jewish civil servants, businessmen, doctors and workers are no longer the victims of racial laws. The German fiscal authorities pitilessly exploit the refugees' predicament in an attempt to save the state from bankruptcy once again.
Diese Devisenknappheit und auch diese Knappheit.
The shortage of hard currency and the resultant shortage in supplies expedited the expropriation of Jews decisively. The Nazis' main concern was to take possession of their assets, so the Jews were coerced into selling or placing all their valuables, gold, the family silver, foreign shares and so on, at the Reich's disposal, in the jargon of the time. Those who left the country were not allowed to take valuables with them. And all these things that were impounded or left behind were used to buy commodities.
Footage from the spring 1936. The Kurfürstendamm in Berlin is the Third Reich's shop window. Here, Nazi Germany presents to the world its cosmopolitan and modern side. All Jewish-owned shops were forcibly closed down during the previous year. Jewish businesses were vandalized by gangs of thugs, and Jewish citizens beaten up in broad daylight. Now the Reich's capital is being decked out for the approaching Summer Olympics. American movies are still shown in German cinemas, and Hollywood happily collects up the proceeds from the Third Reich. At the same time, in a studio in Berlin-Tempelhof, the shooting commences for a comedy titled Wenn wir alle Engel wären, If We All Were Angels. Amateur footage shows the leading actor Heinz Rühmann at work. Being the perfect embodiment of the common man and a symbol for the social achievements of the Third Reich, Rühmann is one of Germany's most successful film stars, with a fee of 80,000 Reichsmarks per movie. The beginning of August marks the opening of the Summer Olympic Games. The eyes of the world are on Berlin, and the hundreds of thousands of visitors from all around the globe who have come to the city will experience the peace-loving nature of the Nazi regime. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels instructs that all anti-Semitic rabble-rousing slogans be removed from the city. During the coverage of the Games, the race aspect is to be ignored. Prior to the Games, the USA had threatened not to send their team to Berlin if Jewish athletes were to be discriminated against.
A boycott should certainly have taken place on moral grounds, but it was politically decided not to go ahead with the boycott. A boycott in political terms would probably have not made much difference, because it would have consolidated the notion in Germany that the world was against this regime, and probably even in a sense have strengthened Hitler. As it was, the fact that the world came to Berlin and took part in these Olympic Games was an immense propaganda triumph for Hitler. And, of course, the best face was put upon this. Therefore, the persecution of the Jews was held back in these months. Germany looked at its best during the Olympics. They were a magnificent success. Also in sporting terms, too, it was a big spectacle. And so Hitler was able to achieve a remarkable propaganda triumph through the Berlin Olympics.
Yet, some people astutely recognize the real intentions of the Nazis. Jewish philologist Victor Klemperer notes in his diary on the 13th of August 1936, "It is constantly drummed into the German people, as well as the visitors, that what one sees here is the upturn, the blossoming, the new spirit, the unity, festiveness and splendor, and of course the peaceful, lovingly embracing the whole world spirit of the Third Reich."
Using the example of the Olympic Games, it's easy to recognize Hitler's tactics of tightening the reins and then loosening them again, then tightening again to pursue his extreme policies. The Olympic Games were an opportunity to demonstrate to the world, look at us, we're a liberal country. The things that people say about us are simply not true. The Jews outside of Germany may be telling horrible stories about us, but here everything is fine. He saw the Games as a great chance to get this message across, and many people fell for it.
Hitler attends the competitions nearly every day. Newspapers and radio offer extensive coverage of the Games. In 1936, sports are exploited for the purposes of politics and propaganda like never before. The Berlin Summer Olympics are the first sporting event at which the latest technological achievement is brought into service.
Achtung, Achtung! Hier sind die Ultrakurzwellensender Berlin-Witzleben auf Welle 6,772 Meter für Bild und auf Welle 7,06 Meter für Ton.
Achtung, Achtung! Fernsehsender Paul Nipkow. Wir begrüßen alle Volksgenossen und Volksgenossinnen in den Fernsehstuben Groß-Berlins mit dem deutschen Gruß Heil Hitler.
In 1935, Germany was the first country in the world to introduce a regular television program. In September 1936, the few viewers can see a reporter of the Nazi-controlled broadcaster giving an account of the party congress in Nürnberg.
Aktuelle Bilddienst des Fernsehsenders Paul Nipkow Berlin bringt nun einen Sonderbericht vom Vorbeimarsch auf dem Adolf-Hitler-Platz. Kurz bevor der Führer eintrifft, bringen wir ein Bild vom Adolf-Hitler-Platz festlich geschmückt und die übervollen Tribünen. Herrlich sonnenbeschienen liegen sie da und wir warten auf das Eintreffen des Führers. Der Führer trifft auf dem Adolf-Hitler-Platz ein. Die Wagenkolonne nähert sich uns. Mit stürmischen Heilrufen begrüßt. Fährt er auf den alten Marktplatz der Stadt Nürnberg, die nunmehr seinen Namen trägt.
Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels does not believe television to be suitable as a mass medium. Hitler's accomplishments are noticed beyond Germany's borders, managing to deceive even critical minds like the leader of Britain's Liberal Party, David Lloyd George, who had been the country's Prime Minister when the Versailles Treaty was signed. After a visit at the Berghof, he praises Hitler and his politics, declaring the Führer of the Germans a really great man.
Im Berliner Clou wurde 500 Kindern von Generaloberst Göring eine fröhliche Weihnacht bereitet.
Da steht ja der Onkel General! Meine lieben jungen Freunde, ich habe euch mit Absicht hier zu uns in die große Stadt eingeladen, damit ihr diesen Weihnachtstag unvergesslich für euer Leben mit nach Hause nehmt.
Through the propaganda machinery, Nazi leaders like Hermann Göring do their utmost to convince the national community that Hitler now enjoys unanimous acceptance. Yet, even after almost 4 years of Nazi rule, skeptics exist among the Germans.
Many people had a wait-and-see attitude and were also skeptical. The majority of Germans were not shouting Heil Hitler excitedly. One aim of a totalitarian regime is that the population adopts a passive attitude. People should concern themselves with themselves, feel more or less good, and hope that better conditions will come, and all the sooner if they make some effort.
Give me 4 years, Hitler had demanded after he seized power, and by now his domination seems to have become unassailable. On the anniversary of the foundation of the Nazi Party, he gives a speech in the ballroom of Munich's Hofbräuhaus about the early days of the movement.
Ich weiß, dass damals viele die Aussichtslosigkeit dieser Bewegung beurteilten nach dem Maß ihrer damaligen Größe und dem Maß der Größe der Aufgaben, die gestellt waren. Sie alle hatten eines nicht erkannt, dass eine solche Bewegung natürlich Zeit braucht und Zeit haben muss, dass der neue Staat nicht eines Tages von den Wolken sich niedersenkt, sondern dass aus dem Volke selbst herauswachsen muss. Denn wenn ich Treue und Glaube und Zuversicht und Fanatismus und Hingabe bekommen will, dann muss ich dorthin gehen, wo diese Tugenden noch zu finden sind. Und sie sind zu finden im Volke selbst, in der breiten Masse dieses Volkes.
Even now, Hitler uses the charged atmosphere of Bavarian beer halls as a stage for his grotesque and rampant tirades. And once again, the old comrades back him up in his delusional fanaticism. Hermann Göring is undisputably second in command in the Nazi regime. He presents himself to the public as a modern statesman and crisis manager. Bad crops and the inefficient administration of agricultural produce have led to food shortages and discontent among the population. To improve the situation, Nazi leaders decide to rely on self-sufficiency. A 4-year plan shall help to come to grips with the problems.
Germany was unable to feed its population at that time. German housewives started to notice it during 1936, 37, 38 because of the so-called fat gap. Among other goods, cooking oil was in short supply, so it had to be imported. Meat was also in short supply, so one had to import cattle feed, and so on. But to do all this, they needed foreign currency, US dollars, Swiss francs or sterling, as no one was willing to accept payment in German Reichsmarks. There was no interest for this on the international stock markets.
Zeppelins had been one of the symbols of Germany's international standing until the Hindenburg disaster. On the 6th of May 1937, airship LZ-129 Hindenburg catches fire and is destroyed in minutes while trying to moor at an airfield near the US town of Lakehurst. While Hitler still professes to fervently advocate the causes of peace in Europe, German soldiers are already fighting a war in Spain. In the civil war between the nationalist rebel forces and the Republican government troops, German aircraft fly combat missions for the first time after the First World War and bomb bases and support points of the Red Republicans. The German Condor Legion unit carries out the bombing of Guernica, at which some 2,500 civilians are killed and 80% of the city are laid to waste. Both sides involved in the Civil War received material aid from the totalitarian powers in Europe. Though officially proclaiming neutrality, both Germany and Italy assist the nationalists under General Franco. Not least, thanks to Germany's help, the fascists quickly managed to gain control of more than half of Spain's territory. The attempt to capture Madrid in 1937 is met with fierce resistance from the government troops and fails. But in 1939, the caudillo has Spain under his control.
The main motivation for Hitler was to fend off communism in Western Europe. On top of that, however, this gave him the opportunity to test out the German Air Force in action with the Condor Legion. And beyond that even, and prompted by Goering, there were advantages to be had from raw materials that Spain could provide. And therefore, there were a number of incentives to get engaged in the Spanish Civil War, although it has to be said, Hitler initially thought it would be a very quick and easy affair. It dragged out, of course, for 3 years in the event.
On the 29th of May 1937, the battleship Deutschland, which is part of the Non-Intervention Committee patrol, is bombed by Republican planes. The Nazi propaganda promotes the fallen soldiers to heroes. The Führer travels to Kiel to attend the funeral ceremony. The dictator uses the incident as a welcome excuse to officially pull out of the International Non-Intervention Agreement for Spain. On the 1st of May, the Nazi youth organizations bring together tens of thousands of boys and girls into Berlin's Olympic Stadium for a rally in the presence of the Führer. Hitler speaks to them about the beautiful new world of National Socialism.
Ihr sollt nicht mit vergrämten Gesichtern herumgehen, sondern ihr sollt noch lachend in die Welt hineinblicken. Und ihr habt Grund dazu, denn diese Welt, eure Welt, unser Volk, unser Reich, sie sind schöner geworden, als sie je zuvor waren.
The state and its ideology gradually permeate all social classes and reach even the remotest villages. An amateur film shot in the Thuringian village of Badra demonstrates how absolute the Nazi sway is. The basic ideas of National Socialism are even drummed into young children. During this festival, in honor of the Führer, the children walk down the streets carrying swastikas entwined with flowers. The Germans have come to terms with life under the swastika. The vast majority are now loyal to their Führer. The regime rewards the population with more and more bonuses.
Dann sind da eben diese Steuerklassen eingeführt worden, die uns heute.
They then introduced new tax brackets, which are actually still used to this day. Essentially, the idea was to offer tax privileges to families with children and not to unmarried workers. A family with the father as sole earner, the wife at home, or maybe earning a little on the side, and 3 or 4 children was a common setup at that time. And the government rewarded them with 10 to 20% less taxation at the expense of those who weren't married. And with this move, they had the majority of the population on their side.
Nazi Germany demonstrates its new strength in September 1937 when Italy's dictator Benito Mussolini comes to Berlin for a state visit. Hitler's pilot Hans Bauer films this footage. The keen hobby filmmaker uses a new 16mm color film for the first time. Il Duce is Hitler's closest ally, so the Führer honors him with a 3-hour military parade in front of Berlin's Technical University. The Reich capital hadn't seen such concentrated military presence since the pre-First World War days.
The purpose of it really was to demonstrate to Mussolini how strong Germany had become. Until then, Hitler had been, in a sense, the junior partner in what had come to be known as the axis between Germany and Italy. Hitler's position had, of course, got stronger and stronger, in particular in 1936 following the takeover of the Rhineland. But now the invitation of Mussolini to Germany was to demonstrate to him at first hand the strength of the Wehrmacht and the power of Nazi Germany. So Mussolini went away from this visit well and truly impressed. From then on, recognized his own position that he now had become quite distinctly the junior partner in this relationship.
Hermann Göring receives Mussolini in Karinhall, his country residence financed from taxpayers' money. A television camera is there to report.
Der Duce wird in Karinhall von Generaloberst Göring und seiner Gattin begrüßt. Der Duce und Generaloberst Göring im Gespräch vor dem Hause in Karinhall. Der Reichsführer Himmler Staatsschauspieler Gustav Gründgen.
Thanksgiving festival in the small village of Ideritz in Anhalt. The unusual footage from everyday life in Nazi Germany is filmed on behalf of the Institute for Folk Studies. The race research scientists have come here from nearby Halle to document the festival. These images are characteristic of Germany in 1937. The subdivisions of the Nazi Party control all public events, even in provincial backwaters. Every citizen contributes to the reconstruction of the country. Everyone is doing their bit for the Führer. The propaganda increasingly turns Hitler into the shining light of German history, as becomes evident during the inauguration of the House of German Art in Munich. Kitschy realism is the favored style in painting. Modern paintings and sculptures are condemned as degenerate, banished from museums and often sold abroad for much-needed foreign currency. Propaganda Minister Goebbels acclaims the achievements of National Socialist art.
Wir haben ein deutsches Theater, einen deutschen Film, eine deutsche Presse, ein deutsches Schrifttum, eine deutsche bildende Kunst, eine deutsche Musik und einen deutschen Rundfunk. Der früher oft gegen uns vorgebrachte Einwand, es gäbe keine Möglichkeit, die Juden aus dem Kunst- und Kulturleben zu beseitigen, weil deren zu viele seien und wir die leeren Plätze nicht neu besetzen könnten, ist glänzend widerlegt worden.
Due to its importance in the early days of National Socialism, Munich has been declared the capital of the movement. Every year on the 9th of November, Hitler and the Nazi leadership commemorate the dead of the failed putsch of 1923 with a meticulously staged march. A propaganda film titled Für uns, For Us, renders the eerie scenes as the veneration of the fallen heroes to the population. Once again, the Führer occupies center stage as a redeemer lost in reverie. Yet only a few days before, he had very pragmatically revealed his plans for the future to a small circle. Hermann Göring fronts an assembly of the highest-ranking commanders in the Third Reich at the Air Ministry in Berlin. On the 5th of November 1937, during a secret conference, Hitler reveals to the military leaders that the use of force would soon become imperative.
Hitler proceeded to give a lengthy discussion not about steel allocation, but about his far-reaching plans for war. And he expounded to the military leaders present his plans for moving against Austria and Czechoslovakia in the near future, and put forward a number of scenarios about the extension of this to war in the period 1943 to 1945. Those present were quite shocked at what they heard, not because this meant extension of German dominance to Central Europe. They were very happy to consider that. But the worry was, in particular with an attack on Czechoslovakia, that this would bring in the Western powers into a war, and those present thought that Germany could not win this war, and therefore the real danger of a war in the near future against the Western democracies was something which then frightened those present.
Carnival 1938 in Nuremberg. The amateur footage documents the Shrovetide revelry in the Third Reich. One of the floats is decorated with the anti-Semitic caricature of a Jew hanging from the gallows, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. On the 12th of March 1938, Wehrmacht units crossed the border to Austria in a friendly visit. Hitler remains on the sidelines at first, entrusting the operation to the unscrupulous and power-hungry Hermann Göring, who, in view of the shortage of raw materials in Germany, has been openly threatening the neighboring country with an annexation to the Reich for some time. A Nazi-friendly government has already been installed in Vienna, and the pro-German section of the population dominates the streets.
When crossing the border into Austria, the soldiers had expected to meet with resistance. They never thought they would receive such a warm welcome. They were totally baffled to see the border practically open to let them in, and people cheering them.
At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, the Führer as well crosses the border into his native country. Tens of thousands of elated supporters have lined the streets, so the convoy's advance is slow. In Linz, his bodyguards must clear a path through the crowd for him. A deeply moved Hitler shows himself to the masses.
Standing on the balcony of the town hall in Linz before 60,000 people, he declared the union of his homeland Austria with the German Reich. That is what he had always wanted and had taken as a matter of course. He wanted all Germans to belong together. And since Austria was a purely German country at the time, the unification gave him the greatest personal satisfaction of his life.
The dictator comes to Vienna as the new head of state. The scenes of rapture as Hitler entered the city defy description, a Swiss observer writes. Before a crowd of 250,000 ecstatic Austrians on the Heldenplatz, Hitler once again announces the unification with the Third Reich.
Als Führer und Kanzler der deutschen Nation und des Reichs melde ich vor der deutschen Geschichte nunmehr den Eintritt meiner Heimat in das Deutsche Reich.
The population is cautiously being prepared for another war. Here, the staff of the Siemens Schuckert plant in Nuremberg is practicing air raid protection measures in the factory yard. Red Cross nurses and members of the fire brigade simulate typical air raid injuries. In view of the impending reality of the massive bombing campaigns on Germany, these images seem absurd. Julius Streicher provides the ideological toughening up. The Gauleiter of Franconia demands the introduction of the death sentence for race defilers. Reading between the lines, one can recognize that Streicher does not shy away from murder in his rabble-rousing rhetoric.
Ihr Völker seht im Bacillus und euch, es ist der ewige fressende Jude. Und wenn ihr wieder frei werden wollt, wie eure Väter es waren, dann macht euch frei vom Juden.
In Wien, Juden flüchten.
Dann haben sie wieder ein bisschen locker gelassen.
After relaxing the reins a bit, they started preparing for the next coup. Germans had to get used to the idea that they needed to assert themselves in order to protect their German identity against the other subhumans, or whatever they were called. And this was consistently required. But the people who were subjected to it didn't realize it was all part of a scheme.
After the annexation to the Reich, the hate of Jews is openly propagated in Austria, and no one seems to mind. From day one, the henchmen of the country's new ruler are behind the scenes of this grand plan. Over 10,000 of Hitler's opponents are arrested, beaten up and humiliated, and Jews are declared outlaws.
What's remarkable is that all these race and isolation laws that Hitler cautiously introduced in small steps over a period of 5 years in Germany, from 33 to 38, were all introduced in a day in Austria. It also has to be said, although it's shameful for Austria, that it all transpired with the enthusiastic support of the population.
It
was common citizens who started ransacking Jewish houses on the first night the laws were enacted.
During this period, Hitler likes to demonstrate his closeness to the people. Large delegations, such as the Austrian women and girls on this footage, frequently visit Obersalzberg and get to see Hitler, who, for the cameras of the propaganda, happens to step out of his refuge to gallantly greet his subjects.
The
Berghof was supposed to be a sanctuary for his private life, secluded in this beautiful landscape. A man who finds escape in nature, enjoys the clean mountain air and goes for walks. But in actual fact, the reason for his walks was so that he could pat the children who happened to be around. The Berghof had become like a pilgrimage site. It was teeming with people who wanted to see the Führer, and he would pat the children and have nice photographs taken and so on. But he also had another place where he would meet the official visitors, like heads of governments, in more relaxed surroundings.
Tausend und abertausend Hände recken sich dem Führer entgegen, und sein Gruß gibt allen den tiefsten und unerschütterlichen Glauben an ein großes und ewiges Deutschland.
In July 1938, tens of thousands of women congregate in Breslau's Hermann Göring Stadium to pay homage to Hitler. The majority of Germans attribute the prosperity and peace they feel they live in to the genius of the Führer. The hysterical outbursts of his supporters have not been staged for the propaganda. To see the Führer eye to eye once is the wish of many devoted National Socialists. The leisure organization Kraft durch Freude, Strength Through Joy, has been set up to fulfill the small wishes of the population. The organization's pride and joy is Wilhelm Gustloff, a cruise ship that has been in service since April 1938, so that also the common man can have a taste of luxury. It is the way the Nazis choose to improve the productivity of the workforce. Kraft durch Freude proves a great success, and it further strengthens the people's ties to the regime. Only a few suspect the dreadful state of the National Socialist economy at the time.
People in the stock exchange refused to buy German government stocks. They said this country is so heavily in debt that things are bound to go wrong. The only way for this to be adjusted is by inflation, a depreciation of these bonds. So they stopped buying. Now, to hide from the outside world the fact that the state needed money desperately, they had to rebuy their own bonds on the stock exchange in order to support the going rate so that it doesn't drop.
Resourceful businessmen actually offer this amateur film from July 1938 for sale in Germany at the time. The Führer on a special train on his way to Bayreuth for the Wagner Festival. As usual, the group of Nazi bigwigs proceeds to the festival theater accompanied by rapturous cheering. Hitler is nervous, for a crisis fueled by Germany over the German minority in Czechoslovakia has been smoldering for weeks. He feels exposed here, so physically close to the Czech border. All side roads are closed to traffic, and windows and doors of houses along the route have to remain closed. As the opera lovers step out of the festival theatre for some fresh air during the intermission, Sudeten German demonstrators are patiently waiting for Hitler to appear on the balcony and courteously greet the euphoric crowd before they chant their "Home to the Reich" slogans for the newsreel cameras. For months now, the propaganda apparatus of the Third Reich has been exploiting the grievances of the ethnic German minority in Sudetenland. A top-secret plan under the codename Case Green proposes the taking of Czechoslovakia by force. On the 29th of September, Britain's Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain arrives in Munich. Hitler has reluctantly agreed to a peace effort. The meeting is held in the Führerbau, Hitler's office building in Munich. France's Prime Minister Édouard Daladier and Italian dictator Benito Mussolini join them as seconds. The European major powers accept the incorporation of the Sudetenland into the Third Reich. For one last time, Hitler refrains from using military force.
Hitler went away from this conference fairly dissatisfied. Of course, he got the Sudetenland, but he had wanted actually to attack Czechoslovakia. And so at the last minute, he'd had to defer the attack on Czechoslovakia. As Goebbels said, you can't fight a war on account of modalities. And the British and the French had been prepared to give Hitler everything that he wanted in the Sudetenland, regarding him as a nationalist leader still. So he had to defer the attack on the rest of Czechoslovakia until later. It wasn't too much later that it actually occurred.
On the 1st of October 1938, the Sudeten Germans give the Wehrmacht an enthusiastic welcome. In the eyes of many Germans, peace now seemed secured for the time being. 3 million people return home to the Reich. Hitler visits the Sudetenland on the 6th of October. He declares that Germany has no further territorial claims in Europe. An army officer films the march from a window. Propaganda celebrates the assimilation as another great success for Hitler and his regime. 400,000 Czechs must leave the territory. The new border makes the Third Reich larger by 22,000 square kilometers. The outward expansion goes hand in hand with the radicalization within the Reich. So far, Jews in Germany have been isolated and humiliated primarily by means of discriminating laws. On the night of the 9th of November, the Night of Broken Glass, so-called Kristallnacht, Nazi Germany flings open the last remaining moral floodgates. The anti-Semitic pogrom instigated by propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels culminates in the destruction of hundreds of synagogues and over 8,000 Jewish businesses, and the killing of some 100 Jews by the angry mobs. What is more, the victims themselves must pay for the damage.
Da wurde beschlossen, 1 Milliarde Reichsmark den Juden.
It was decided that the Jews had to pay a fine of 1 billion Reichsmarks, an amount that constituted 6.5% of the state's annual income at the time.
Das Deutsche Reich brauchte die, weil die nicht mehr wussten.
The Reich needed the money because they didn't know how to pay their civil servants otherwise.
Regime schrappte ununterbrochen.
The regime was continuously hovering on the brink of insolvency, and the only way out was to occupy more territories, oppress more minorities, and try and take away more and more from them.
Anderen Minderheiten immer mehr wegzunehmen.
Hitler plans to manifest the greatness of the Führer state in the architecture of the Reich's capital. To realize his vision of the world capital Germania, large sections of Berlin's inner city must be demolished. A main resettlement department, which was specially established for this purpose, sees to the vacating of whole streets and apartment buildings. First on the agenda is a new chancellery. On the 7th of February 1939, architect Albert Speer leads his employer through the not quite completed rooms. The Chancellery of the Reich is predominantly a representative building. According to the Führer's wish, the distance between the entrance and the reception hall, along the seemingly endless corridors, was to convey an impression of the Third Reich's grandeur to the guests. During the New Year reception, Hitler reasserts his peaceful intentions. Only a few weeks later, on the 30th of January 1939, exactly 6 years after seizing power in Berlin, the Führer, during a speech in the Reichstag, sheds the mask of peacefulness for good.
Ich will heute wieder ein Prophet. Wenn es dem internationalen Finanzjudentum in und außerhalb Europas gelingen sollte, die Völker noch einmal in einen Weltkrieg zu stürzen, dann wird das Ergebnis nicht die Bolschewisierung der Erde und damit der Sieg des Judentums sein, sondern die Vernichtung der jüdischen Rasse in Europa.
Those who have a chance to leave Germany take advantage of it now, even if it means leaving behind their homes and fortunes. Many people's plans fail due to restrictive immigration laws in France, Britain, Switzerland, and the United States. This American footage suggests that the refugees can expect generous assistance. Reality is very different. The refugees are faced with bureaucratic obstacles and anti-German resentment. Most countries have imposed entry restrictions. Still, some 150,000 Jews succeed in leaving the Third Reich. Transports with children are treated preferentially. Only distant countries such as China or Mexico are willing to take in refugees without visas. Since Hitler's accession to power, Nazi Germany has spent 45 billion Reichsmarks for rearmament. Based on the provisions of the four-year plan, the money was mainly spent on new tanks and aircraft. However, the financing of the program has long reached its limits, and only the expansion of the Third Reich can tap new sources of capital. The first victims of this strategy are the Czechs in March 1939. Czechoslovakian President Emil Hacha cannot stop the systematic pillaging of his country. The occupation of the Sudetenland had been the first step in this direction.
So wird erstmal das Eigentum der Tschechen.
The property of the Czechs who left Sudetenland after the occupation became state property. The property of the Jews from Karlsbad who fled from the Germans became state property. Later that year, Prague was occupied too. The same thing also happened with the annexation of Austria. Among the first to go in was always a special commander of the Reichsbank that seized the occupied country's central bank and the bank vaults. And this practice continued all through the Second World War.
Für das Deutsche Reich sicherstellt, das geht durch den ganzen Zweiten Weltkrieg hindurch, überall.
In every new country they occupied, they immediately took possession of its reserves, which were used to stabilize Germany's economy for a short period of time, because it was thrown completely out of kilter.
On the 15th of March, the Wehrmacht marches into Prague. 6 years of brutal subjugation begin for the Czech population. I succeeded in what had been futilely aspired to for centuries, Hitler in a victorious mood is purported to have said, adding, "I will go down in history as the greatest German."
Until then, the Western powers had regarded Hitler as a very radical nationalist. And he himself, of course, had always said he wanted to bring parts of Europe back into Germany where there was an ethnic German population. He'd stipulated with regard to the Sudetenland this was his last territorial claim. So the Western powers had seen him as an arch nationalist, a very radical nationalist. But of course, the entry into Prague, now for the first time into a country where the population was not German, opened everybody's eyes, and the pressure in Britain now on Chamberlain to upturn his policy of appeasement now became unstoppable. Chamberlain reversed this policy and now accepted the fact that Hitler wanted world dominion and he would not stop at nothing.